Let's get real. Let's get loud on America Out Loud Talk Radio. This is the McCullough Report, and I'm your host, Dr. Peter McCullough. Also, we are filming for Focal Points, and it's my great pleasure to be having our first in-studio production of the program, and my distinguished guest is Dr. James Marcum. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to be here with you and to share with you some of the interesting things that we've been doing and also to throw some new ideas out there.
Wow, I hardly ever get a chance to be paired up with a cardiology colleague. We're both fellows of the American College of Cardiology. We're here today in Phoenix at the Wisdom Pearl. And this is the fight for your frontal lobe. This is the most challenging, interesting. It's a symposium, but it's also fellowship and worship and a great chance of community. I'm here with my family. I'm absolutely thrilled. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, kind of introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, well, Dr. McCullough, as you know, I went through the medical rigors, okay? So I did medical school at the University of Texas, San Antonio. Before I did undergraduate in Austin, so I'm a Longhorn.
There we go.
So we like to hook 'em horns a little bit. And then after that, I did Medical Center of Delaware, internal medicine, which is now Thomas Jefferson. And then, boy, I didn't really know what I wanted to be. Even in medical school, I didn't know what I wanted to be. So I thought about some family practice, but my wife says, nah, you're not family practice. So she says, why don't you try internal medicine? So I did internal medicine. Then we're doing a lot of clinic, and I saw a lot of low back pain and a lot of depression. And I said, that really wasn't my niche. So I had some great mentors there, and they said, why don't you try cardiology? I said, well, okay. Those were the years when cardiologists got to do a little bit of everything. So I did some research papers, and I decided University of Kentucky, because I'm from the South.
Oh, very good.
I'm from the South. I'm from Eastern Tennessee. We've been there for a long time. So went to University of Kentucky, did my cardiology fellowship there, and general cardiology, did everything.
But you were heavily influenced by a real great in cardiology there at Kentucky at the time.
Yeah, we had some just great mentors there. This was where Dr. Anthony DeMaria was at one time.
Now he's a notable figure. Tony DeMaria, one of the pioneers in echocardiography.
Yes,
and also he became the editor of the Journal of the American College of Cardiology.
He was just leaving when I got there, but I was influenced by Michael Smith. He was big echo. In fact, we were so much echo there, we didn't do much nuclear. Okay, we did not do much nuclear. Everything was echo, stress echo, debunamine echo.
But people have said that cardiac ultrasound or echocardiography really is the heart and soul of cardiology, because it's our privilege really to be able to directly visualize the heart. Not only directly visualize it, but study flow and the dynamics through the heart. And you were trained by one of the best.
Yeah, so we got to do that. But one of the things that was most interesting, we got to study aortic dissection. In those days, of course, we did dissection. We did a TEE. This was some of the early days of TE.
That's transesophageal echocardiography.
Right. We would have them, usually they would be in a motor vehicle accident in cervical collars. We would go up there and we would drop the TE probe, and we did well-designed studies that showed that TE was a modality to detect acute aortic dissection. Now, subsequently, it wasn't as feasible. Now almost everyone does CT scanning on that, but we were that's how big in echo we were.
Right.
So it was a great time to study, and I can remember, we go out in rural Kentucky. That was the thrombolytic era.
There you go.
We gave a lot of thrombolytics then. We still did balloon angioplasty. We these perfusion balloons. We don't have those anymore, but things were different back then.
Right. So what Dr. Marcum is describing is this progression of advancement in the most dangerous form of a heart attack called an ST segment elevation myocardial infarction. That's where a blood clot is actually blocking flow to a critical part of the heart. And all the advancements, clot buster drugs, the excitement in using those, and then finally to actually getting up in the middle of the night, doing a coronary angiogram, and then getting a wire across that clot and then opening up the artery.
Very exciting time to be learning cardiology.
For sure.
But in those days, we were trained in a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
We did a little bit of everything, cardioversions, read the echo ourselves. We did a lot of things ourselves. But, you know, as years have progressed over the last 30 years, I've seen the growth in our field. You know, we didn't hardly do ablations back then, remember?
Remember
You know?
the first ablations. Now, ablations are an internal procedure to try
Mm-hmm.
to handle electrical patterns in the heart. Initially, it was just with various forms of what we call SVT, or supraventricular tachycardia, but then it progressed to atrial fibrillation and ventricular arrhythmias.
Yeah.
But how long did those procedures last?
Forever. And now in Chattanooga, in our group, we have 5 different electrophysiologists, and we do ablations on the rhythm called atrial fibrillation, which is the part of the heart near the pulmonary veins. We do SVT, we do VTAC ablations, and it's pretty routinely. And SVT ablations, we're near the AV node. That goes pretty quick now.
Those are the easiest ones
Yes.
now.
And nowadays, we're moving away from medicines for the treatment of these and more towards the ablations. And someday, this is going to be sort of what we do firsthand.
You know, I did my residency in Seattle at University of Washington. And back in the day, we were doing drug research on arrhythmias. So the Western Washington study of, you know, we worked heavily with amiodarone, flecainide, propafenone, quinidine, procainamide. Do you remember all these drugs?
Yes, I don't, you know, I didn't love quinidine very much.
When was the last time you prescribed procainamide?
Oh, it was probably a few years ago, but it was for a Wolf Parkinson White situation. So I did, but it didn't work out well. So they ended up getting cardioverted, getting back in rhythm. But it's rare. It's rare.
I don't think I've
procainamide. I get some IV procainamide.
For me, it's been decades.
It's been a while. You don't see that much.
So the point we're making is, you know, like in all fields, these fields in medicine have tremendous advancements. And over the course of any doctor's career, one of the more, I think, exciting and gratifying parts of a career in medicine is to actually witness and be a part of these advancements.
Yes. And remember defibrillators? Do you remember? We didn't have defibrillators back when I started.
Right.
That was a new event. Stents, drug-eluting stents.
Do you remember the drugs we used to use for the initial stents?
Yes. Remember Tyclid?
Right. So there was 5 blood thinners: aspirin, ticlopidine, which had a toxicity, warfarin, dextran, and then, of course, Coumadin.
Yeah.
And so, you know, can you imagine being on 5 blood thinners?
I can't.
And I just, because the sheer terror of putting a piece of metal inside a human coronary artery to go into a critical part of the body. I'll never forget those days of just being on call and just, you know, having bleeding coming out from all the catheter sites and oh my Lord.
I can remember one of the very first patients I put on Tyclid became neutropenic.
Well, there you go.
You know, and so, but I've been able to see the evolution, the improvement of stents for ST segment, the worst type of MIs, how well we can deliver them. The wires are so easy to get across the lesions now.
So the stents have become better and safer. The drugs, including the blood thinners, have become better and safer, and we use fewer of them. So, you know, although we're in an era where we almost sense there's a backlash against kind of conventional medicine, you know, to argue both sides here, there have been bona fide advancements that I think
there is a place for modern medicine. You know, for emergencies, I want modern medicine. If my heart's going too slow and I want a pacemaker, you know.
Me too.
If I can't hear, I want a hearing aid. You know, if I can't see because I got cataracts, I want some surgery. So there's a place for modern medicine for emergencies, I think, and for parts that are wearing out. But we've not done well, in my opinion, at getting at the cause of disease, the endothelium. You know, our disease is at the heart is the endothelium.
Right.
You know,
endothelium is the internal lining of the blood vessels by sheer cellular mass and surface area. So actually the largest kind of organ or tissue in the body. Right. And the endothelium is constantly in contact with blood. Now, it has a critical layer called the glycocalyx, which kind of keeps the blood cells from physically touching the endothelial cells. But there's so much molecular biology going on there. The endothelium, out of all the structures probably in the cardiovascular system, the most responsive to exercise and lifestyle.
Yes, and these systems are so complex. You know, what triggers disease? You know, it's just not one factor. And I heard a lecture not too long ago about all the different factors. We really don't know for sure what causes some of these things. You know, the epigenetics, is it a little bit of that? Is it a little bit of this risk factor on predisposed genetics? We don't know a lot of things, but what we do know is we need to make the body as healthy as we can to prevent some of this genetic aging that occurs from all these sources and to mitigate some of these risk factors, some that we can control. Cigarettes is a big one we can control, some of these, but some we just can't control. You know?
Now, most people understand genetics. They think about their mother and father, and they look at their appearance, and they have a sense of kind of what has been bestowed on them in terms of the genetic transfer of genetic the genes from mother and father. But a lot of people don't understand epigenetics. So can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, the way I like to think about it, and it really about 2012 when this started explosion, when the genome was sequenced, remember? And the genome was sequenced, and actually one of the scientists said they named the genome the language of God, of how the DNA I like to think is the hardware.
That was Francis Collins who wrote that.
Yeah. The DNA, language of God. The DNA is the hardware, and we have the epigenetics, that's sort of like the software that runs the hardware. Okay. Of course, we know the DNA makes proteins, tells our body what to do, but this epigenetics is what turns on and off different genes. And we're learning more about this as time goes on. I guess Dr. Benson at Harvard, remember he did all the mind-body research. Herbert Benson, he did a lot of that and showed how our mind itself affected our epigenetics, which turn on and off genes, especially the stress-related genes.
So you think that's legit then?
Oh, I do.
That
and
stress can actually influence
later
genetic
on,
function.
Dusek and his team did these mind-body interventions where they can actually study which genes were turned on and off by relaxation techniques, including different types of worship. And he showed that certain genes could be turned on and off. And later, Burek, in her studies, she did a sort of a look at all of the different studies. They started to identify these kappa pathways. Well, these were actually epigenetic pathways that could turn off genes that stimulated inflammation. So can you imagine someone having an intervention like worship or different types of relaxation techniques or prayer? Now, they did some with yoga, and it actually turned off the genes that turn on inflammation. So you turn down inflammation. We know that the inflammation is enemy to the endothelium.
Right.
The body doesn't want epinephrine, adrenaline, cytokines, leukins. We don't like this chronically.
None of the above.
It's a chronic milieu that in someone that's predisposed to having disease can cause this problem. And it sort of, let's say a body is going to get old at 80 and you have all this stress chemistry going on. Okay. And remember the stress chemistry, the amygdala part of the brain. Okay. The amygdala turned on, the stress, I have to stay alive. The selfish part of the brain makes all this inflammation and it damages the endothelium. Enough endothelium gets damaged from whatever reason. We get a clot, we get a plaque, we get hypertension, we get an aneurysm.
Stroke.
Yes. And sooner or later we have a problem. So this ability to treat with these techniques is just now being explored. Now, one of the biblical textbooks I use is the Bible. Now, a lot of people say, how can a modern day cardiologist use the Bible as a source of treatment? Well, in talking to critics, and you've had some critics in your life, right? There's something about the truth. The truth doesn't go away. Right. It's going to be there, and sooner or later, it's going to come out. Well, I've chosen as my true north the Bible. Now, I know you have done tons of work in science, and the studies that are out there. Some are good, some are not good. So you cannot believe the sciences because they are made by men. Science is made by men, okay? Right. And men have flaws. There's conflicts of interest. There's looking at studies with dubious endpoints, fancy. And you know this better than I do.
But, an important one while we're on this topic is bias.
Yes.
Now, I've found the strongest form of bias is actually what I call investigator bias. So it's the bias that what the doctor or professor really, really believes in. That's made a commit. So it's in their mind. So you'll meet some and they'll say, well, I'm absolutely convinced that this is the most important factor. And And if you're dealing with a multi-factor problem from heart disease, then every one of the papers from that doctor, it's always the number one factor is always his factor of interest.
Right.
It's like, well, how is that? How
Yeah.
come smoking doesn't come out in your analysis, what have you? So investigator bias, and you know what it's fed by? It's fed by research grants. So when
Money.
when someone gets to a reputation that they're the homocysteine expert or the estrogen receptor expert, what have you, and there's one grant after another, I've seen people literally their eyes become riveted on the target
Yes.
of the next grant.
Yeah, so there is a place for science. Don't get me wrong, but science is made by men. Men make errors, and sometimes, depending on what they're using the science for, there's money involved, and it gets biased very quickly, and people get behind it, and we see different systems that make money that try to promote these things that maybe not have the best science or other conflicts of interest, and there's problems. So the point I want to make, I think everyone can agree that over the last 5 years, there's been a distrust in science.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, science is a process of
Yes.
which men use. The process itself is fallible. The men and women are even more fallible than the principles. And when you mix in fear, contagious groupthink,
Yes.
a lot of money,
There you go.
government overreach, and then all of a sudden the entire enterprise
Right.
goes in
Right.
a really wrong direction.
So if we think about that process itself, first of all, we can't believe all the science we hear. Secondly, when this milieu starts happening, it turns on the stress chemistry of the brain, the amygdala. We
good
start
point.
making adrenaline, cortisol, the inflammatory mediators. Even though we might not recognize it, there's some element of chronic stress in the in the body. We're damaging our endothelium to some degree. We put that with other things that could damage the endothelium, like certain proteins that might be out there, certain antigens,
body
right?
weight,
Other
fat.
things, cigarettes, all those risk factors,
Right.
new risk factors that we've
Right.
never experienced in society that sometimes society says is a good thing for us.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
You know, we get an antigen in us that our body's not used to. It creates another immune response. And then we get the fear. It all adds up. The epigenetics doesn't know what to do. We start making these inflammatory mediators. We turn on the part of our brain called the amygdala. We downshift our brains. When our brains are downshifted, remember they're inflamed, we don't think with the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex. In fact, if you look at that, there's been some research by Andrew Newberg on the anterior cingulate cortex, and he's shown by just 12 minutes of worship and prayer, you can make the anterior cingulate cortex become enlarged. You can grow a brain.
You're kidding me.
No, and this is the part of the brain where we have love, altruism. They call it the God brain.
Wow.
Because this is where God lives. This is where we make good decisions, and the decisions affect everything in our body. But he also noticed through his studies, and he used PET scans where he scanned people that did these interventions. And these were people that never had tried these things before. So he found out that the amygdala became smaller. He measured the adrenaline, the cortisol, the inflammatory meters.
Really?
They all turned down just by something as simple as 12 minutes of worship or prayer every day. So here we have a new intervention that can treat chronic disease, that can lower the risk of heart attack, that can lower the risk of damage to the vessels, that could help us tremendously. But not only did he take that, but now we have the genetic research that's backing that up. So just think what's going to happen someday. We have the technology now to say, hey, listen, I'm going to give you these factors in your life. Let's say I'm going to have you pray, maybe read the Bible, take some deep breaths, serve some people, and I'm going to look at your epigenetics and see exactly what formula is best to turn on this chronic inflammatory pathway. And I can say, for you, it looks like this. For another person, it might be singing or being outside. That might be the best form of worship. But we now have the science to prove this. But I wanted to get back, Dr. McCullough, to my source of truth. So I was talking about the Bible as a textbook. And a lot of people are doubting about that, okay? And I think that's fair. When I was at the University of Texas, I used to walk and on the tower there, that tower where that guy killed a lot of people. There's a text that says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So truth is very important. It doesn't go away.
Right.
And I know that you personally have been battling with truth. And now we see some of the things that you said a few years ago is true. Now, some people are too proud to admit this, but they need to, okay?
Right.
So we can move forward.
Yeah.
If we don't accept truth, we accept a lie. Lie turns on all this stress chemistry, this coercion that damages not only an individual, but damages society as a whole.
Are you saying that some people who are living with lies, they've kind of almost told themselves that they're going to have to live with a lie, that they're probably chronically under this internal stress?
Yes. Whether they know it or not, their brains are downshifted because of, and you know, remember, when you live a lie, that's a life of selfishness. That's not a life of love. That's not a life of altruism. That's I must stay alive at all cost. It's all about me. It's nothing about, and some people don't even realize it because we were made to stay alive, right?
But what about leaders
Yeah.
who have made decisions, I mean big decisions of which human lives were in the balance? And what comes to mind is a decision to go to war.
Yes.
A decision to, invade another country and bomb another country into oblivion. A decision to have public health messaging in a pandemic that causes a series of events. Why don't leaders, after all the dust is settled, why don't they come out and say, we made a mistake. We did the best we could at the time, but why don't they, in a sense, confess mistakes? Why is it always a stance by our leaders to say, nope, we will never admit we're wrong?
Yeah. And, if you go back to my biblical textbook, the Bible, this happened in the Bible numerous times, and if you think about, if you believe in the Bible, and, I can prove it statistically, all the prophecies coming true, Stoner, a mathematician, looked at 8 prophecies, hundreds of years ahead, the chance of all of them coming true, of just 8 prophecies regarding Christ, okay? The chance of that randomly coming true was 1 in 100 quadrillion.
Yeah.
Of that randomly happened. 8 prophecies, okay?
Well, what just came to mind on this idea of leaders not admitting they're wrong is Pharaoh.
Yes.
And Moses.
Yes. Heart
right?
and heart, right?
And, they go through one plague after another. And
Yeah.
Pharaoh never says, well, I'm wrong now.
Right.
He just
Right.
keeps going and going and going until basically
Yeah.
he loses his own son.
Yeah. So in answering your question about this, we have to prove we have to give some evidence that the Bible's true.
Okay.
So we can do that through mathematics. Okay. Peter Stoner's done that. The chance of these 8 prophecies of Christ happening randomly is the same as you winning 21 lotteries in a row. That's 1 in 100 quadrillion. It's impossible. Just the statistics. And then you add up 125 prophecies and all of these hundreds years. But if that's not enough, you can go to the archaeology.
Yes.
The Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes.
Palladi stones. Cities that they talk about like Sodom and Gomorrah, that now we're finding that. But if that's not enough for you to be convinced that the Bible's true, you can go to people that actually witness this. Josephus in the Bible. He wrote about all of these things that happened. There's a gentleman named Irenaeus, 200 AD, that he actually knew a fellow named Polycarp, who actually knew the Apostle John. So eyewitnesses. But then perhaps greater than that, if you want to prove that the Bible's true, and looking at this objectively. Now, I'm not saying how you interpret the Bible, but just proving.
That's separate.
But what other document that's been written over 1,500 years by all of these different authors over a unified course, is there any other piece of literature ever like that exists? No. Nothing has moved forward over time. What's the chance of that happening? And then what's the chance of people willing to give their lives for something if it wasn't true?
Oh, boy.
And how many people have we recorded that gave their lives throughout all times for this book?
For sure.
So I needed to give people some evidence that the Bible is a source of truth, because we have to have a true north. Because if science isn't the true north, we have to say, well, maybe the Bible's the true north.
But, what was going through my mind when you were
Yeah.
really, really developing that was my first Bible trip to Israel.
Yeah.
And we went with Andrew Forrest. So hopefully Andrew's listening. And Andrew's a young pastor at our church, and Andrew had never been before. And I remember that trip. Of course, you spend a lot of time. If anybody's been on a Bible trip, you're on buses, you're on a schedule, you're going to these sites. And I remember Andrew just saying, this is making it become so unbelievably real in my mind. There's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found.
Yes.
This is Capernaum, where Christ, this is the Garden of Gethsemane.
Right.
Once you're in these places,
Changes you.
That's it. So I hope things can stabilize in the Middle East, and a great tragedy that's going on there right now. But for Christians to understand that, that part of the Middle East is the birthplace of Christianity. It's not ever going to be one particular religion dominating that land. It will not. It's the birthplace of Christ. It's a special place. And when you go, it does in your mind, I think, solidify things.
And that's a good point, Dr. McCullough, that you made there, that in looking at true north, something that you can say that's true, that you can base your life and all your decisions on, including your scientific and your practice of cardiology and medicine, you have to have a true north. And you have to believe it in your heart. But if nothing else, for those people who have never tried it, I invite them, just read the Bible themselves. Give it an honest evaluation. Look at the evidence. I presented some evidence, but I think a person has to do it themselves.
Yeah.
But I've seen this book and the Bible change lives. Addicts that were able to stop doing things. That just turn people around totally. And even if it doesn't turn them around in the short term, they have hope. They believe in the truths in the Bible. And, if you believe in the truths of the Bible, and I call that biblical prescriptions, for life, these biblical prescriptions, the Bible is far ahead of science. Far ahead of science, We're eventually getting science to prove. For instance, they talk about the earth being a circle in Isaiah, long before Copernicus,
Wow.
Or the weight and the wind in Job. That was long before different things happened, and they describe that. Here's one, we talked about epigenetics. In the book of Genesis, there's a fellow named Jacob there, and he had a bunch of livestock, and he took the livestock to the water, and he wanted to create livestock on his own. So what he did was he peeled some bark, threw it into the water during mating time, and so what his livestock did is that during mating time, they drank that, and what they ended up doing is they ended up methylating their genes. So we see genetic modification here.
What?
They had variable penetrance. Some genes were turned on regarding this coloration. So some of them end up speckled, spotted, and streaked.
You're kidding me.
This was the first epigenetic study ever done on animals. But now we have the science to prove the epigenetics the Bible was true in science years ago. We just didn't have the science to back it up. Well, what about nutrition? Now, I've luckily been able to work with, I don't know if you know T. Colin Campbell.
Wow, yeah.
He wrote the China study, and I was actually involved in some of that, getting out about the importance of eating more of a plant-based diet.
Right.
So I was involved in some of those initial get the word out. And Dr. Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic, who's done some work on how we can reverse possibly cardiovascular disease, with proper nutrition. But that was described in the Bible. One of the first nutritional studies done in the Bible was in Daniel 1, where Daniel and his friends, now remember, I'm using the Bible as my medical textbook, Daniel and his friends, they ate a pulse and water, vegetables and water.
Right.
And then after a short period of time, they compared them to the control group, and they were 10 times brighter and smarter. Go figure.
And was this when they were in Babylon?
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
now let's take this 300 years later, and this Babylonian empire has spread to the Greeks some of the knowledge, and then all of a sudden, Dr. Hippocrates, you've heard of him, he comes along and says, hey, he heard about Daniel's study maybe, and he says, well, let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. And now we know that eating more towards a plant-based, healthy diet is much better for the body than some of the things that we put in it now. And that was described in the Bible years ago, before we now have the science to back it up.
Oh, so that really fits with your
yes.
theme of
So
the
biblical
Bible being ahead
yes,
of
Bible-based
scientific
truth
discovery.
is ahead of the science.
Wow.
So we can believe in the Bible, our true north, and we see it about inflammation. We've talked about taking a day of rest. We've talked about having times of worship. All of this changes our physiology, whether we can explain it or not. Now, is there a place for modern medicine? Yes, but we have to have this true north. So I've sort of tried to build this into the practice of cardiology and give people new tools, new interventions to treat not only the heart, but the entire brain and the entire body.
Well, listen, you threw in another important point I want to explore with you. We're here at Wisdom Pearl having a great convo with James Marcum, who's a cardiologist, and we're learning so much about biblical history and this theme of the Bible in many ways being ahead of the scientific discoveries, particularly in cardiovascular disease, this kind of mind-heart, cardiovascular system connection. And I wanted to explore with you a very important point that Charlie Kirk literally spent over an hour on stage on. And that's idea of a day of rest, the Sabbath, referred to in obviously different denominations in Christianity. Either it's a Sabbath, if it's Saturday, or the Lord's Day, Sunday. But tell us about this importance of a day of rest.
Yeah, I think that we've sort of built the case, first of all, that the Bible is a source of truth. You have to have that first. So if you believe that, the second thing that we built on is that the Bible is ahead of science. So we might not have all of the science that people would like, but it will come, just like these other examples I've shown. Nutritional studies, the methylation studies. The Bible's never missed. Prophecy doesn't miss. It doesn't miss. So I'm trying to build a case for those listening to investigate this.
Right.
So if we think about the Sabbath rest, that was given before bad things happened, before the fall. Okay? So God worked 6 days and he said, let's rest. So here we have a day that God stopped all the noise of the universe just to have a time for a person to rest, to have a relationship, to have some joy, to have some happiness. All that was happening. So physiologically, of course, the body's perfect at that time. Okay? There wasn't these bad things that destroyed the body. So if we're going to get eventually back to that question of why these people are still making these decisions that they are. Okay? Remember, it's going to come down to the evil one, made decisions based on pride. They took their eyes off this relationship that they were designed to have, that was given by their creator. We were designed to have this. When we don't have this relationship, that puts some stress on the perfect system that was created. So in the brain, what's going on, you can speculate. At one time, we were getting lots of these dopamine hits. We've heard of dopamine, right? All these brain chemistries, the anterior cingulate cortex, the God brain was being fed by God himself through this relationship that would come in the seventh day. So we're having all this good chemistry. We're not turning on this amygdala, this stress chemistry, all these selfishness. We're not turning that on. So when we're not turning that on, we don't have this selfish inflammation going on in the body. We can become the way God made us to be.
Does the body cleanse itself on a Sabbath, do you think?
Well, I would say yes. The body needs rest. You need rest at night. Our GI system, if you keep eating food all the time, you're going to wear yourself out.
Yeah.
We know if we do exercise is good, but too much exercise, you wear yourself out.
Is that the reason why, everyone listening probably has had a period of time where they've clearly worked 7 days a week?
Oh, yeah.
I guarantee everybody listening out there has done it. And you remember that when during residency and fellowship.
Oh, and I used to work those shifts too.
We did it by schedule. And is that the reason why we feel so bad?
Yes. Rest is one of the most useful treatments for disease prevention. If you broke your arm, you wouldn't keep throwing fastballs. If you're sick at your stomach, you're not going to keep eating. If you're in heart failure, you're not going to keep exercising.
Do you remember that story where is an African-American man, and he was working on the railroad, and he worked so hard.
Yes.
He worked himself to death.
Yes. Yes. I remember that story.
He worked himself to death. Is it possible to work yourself to death?
Yes, you can. All that stress, chemistry, you can just wear your body. We've seen that in cardiology. Remember stress-induced cardiomyopathies? So much stress, adrenaline's made that it bombards the heart, and we just see these stress cardiomyopathies. We see that in the hospital fairly regularly.
That was called Takotsubo.
Takotsubo's, right.
Takotsubo.
And we still see it a lot in women after it's very stressful. But, any amount of stress is not good for the body. You know how we treat heart failure, all these medicines that block stress.
There you go, beta blockers.
Coreg, we got Entresto that blocks another access. We got Aldactone. We got all these that block stress. So it's only smart. Let's not have the stress to begin with.
Wow.
So here's a way of rest, a Sabbath rest, a time of rest, a relaxation, where we can maybe mitigate this stress that's going to occur because of all these bad things that's happening on earth. Because what's happened is, once he gave us this rest, but sooner or later we took our eyes off that relationship. It led to damages in the brain, inflammation. We started making poor decisions. Some people say that led to actions. That action led to what we call sin, bad things, damaging our genetics, sort of making us want to fight to stay alive. So our brains, our anterior cingulate cortex, the love part, starts to be diminished. The stress part, let's stay alive, the selfish part starts to be enhanced. And then we start looking. The evil one has sources of dopamine from every source, and just think about it, so we start getting dopamine, which we want to feel pleasurable, to feel good.
Right.
In the hospital, people reach for cocaine, fentanyl, these bad habits that we go on and on. Even sugar can be addictive and provide dopamine hits.
For sure.
So we start filling up our bodies with dopamine to keep our minds happy. But that also turns on these other dangerous, selfish pathways that trigger a problem that we try to fix humanly, but not heavenly.
Wow. Dr. Marcum, we are having a terrific conversation, I think, with one of the most, energized, enthusiastic, convicted cardiologist. When I mean convicted, I mean someone who is sure in his faith and he is sure in his interpretations, laying it out for us, this rationale of why faith is connected to cardiovascular health and cardiovascular disease in the setting of erosion of faith and stress. But we're going to take a break for our commercial sponsors, and we'll be back right after this, and we're going to pick up on Heartwise Ministries, where here Dr. Marcum is going to tell us how this is applied in practice. Let's get real. Let's get loud. On America Out Loud Talk Radio, this is McCullough Report. And your host, Dr. Peter McCullough, for Focal Points. Let's get real. Let's get loud. On America Out Loud Talk Radio, this is a McCullough Report. And I'm your host, Dr. Peter McCullough. You're also watching Focal Points, the leading Substack. My guest today is Dr. James Marcum, and he's been marking it up all over in terms of us understanding this relationship between faith and our sense of assuredness and our fellowship and our constitution, our relationship with us and a power greater than us. This wrestle we have with respect to sin and capitulation and salvation, and then the other side of this, which is go chronic stress, and you were just building the case that, my Lord, everything feeds into this. That stress is related to epigenetics. Stress is directly related to just adverse physiology in the brain and in the cardiovascular system. So tell us about Heartwise Ministries, and how do you actually apply this in practice?
Yeah, well, Heartwise Ministries, years ago when I started evolving these thoughts and God sort of opened up and I started looking at things objectively and through a different lens. And I'm hoping this makes sense. Okay, what I'm saying makes sense because I think there's evidence here to prove it. And if there's not, I invite everyone to look into it themselves, like I did. So I decided to get this information out there. So we have a ministry called Heartwise Ministries, and I do a weekly YouTube called Biblical Prescriptions for Life. and where I have a biblical prescription, and I try to prove the science behind it and try to give people ways to apply it. But I meet people where they're at, Dr. McCullough. People come with a need. So you meet their needs. If they're having chest pain, you want to deal with that.
Sure.
And then you eventually get around to the greater truths in life. So we have a ministry called Heartwise Ministries, Biblical Prescription, a YouTube channel. We also have a site where we can pray for people. We can minister them. I take on people that might need second opinions, things of that nature. And through the years now, I work for myself now. At one time, I part of a big group and part of a big system. But what happened to me during these pandemic years, I was saying some things and I got censored on YouTube quite a bit because I was stepping out in truth, you know, in faith. And blessed, you helped me out a lot during those times with the things that you said. So I investigated those things through a biblical lens, of course.
Very good.
And what you were saying was right. And what other people saying was just not right. It was the fear, coercion, the pride, the things that were existing. And some people did not even realize that they weren't right. And that's scary.
Do you think that's still probably true today?
They're blind. We're blinded from a lack of knowledge.
Wow.
Well, so we think there's a lot of people that are smarter than me, okay? You're much more intelligent than I am. But I would like to think that I can claim James 1:5 that if anybody lacks wisdom, to ask of God. I think wisdom and opening up these greater truths. You know, what's disease reversal forever? What's disease reversal for the short term? What gives me the power to quit smoking or overcome addictions? Where does that come from? You know, and why am I doing it in the first place? Why am I getting all my dopamine from these other sources that's turning on this stress inflammatory pathway when I wasn't designed that way? When I was designed to have worship, a weekly time to be with my Creator, a weekly time of rest where I could grow my anterior cingulate cortex, I can turn down all the inflammatory mediators and maybe slow down genetic aging, and yet at the same time know that at the end of my days, if I believe in the Bible says, you know, for God so loved the world, remember that text? That he gave his only son, the remedy to all of this, his son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have what? Everlasting life. So by believing, you have disease reversal. That gives hope, that takes away fear, and that makes you live each day a good day. Another text I really love is Matthew 11:28. Come unto me, all ye that labor and heavy laden, I will give you rest. Come unto me. What's that mean to you? Be with me. Fellowship with me. Have a Sabbath with me. Turn off the world. I've created this time and space for you because I created you. I love you. You're the best. I want you to be successful because I made you. You're my child. I don't want all this bad stuff to happen to you. So come into me, be with me, have a Sabbath day rest, have a time of worship, whatever that might look like. I'm going to grow that with you. How that looks. It might be through service. It might be through reading the Bible. It might be through prayer. It might be through praise and singing. There's might be in thanks, many ways to worship. But you find that. I now have the epigenetics to prove it, how it helps you. But come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. All the people that are under this stress physiology that's been created by all the bad things that's happened in the world. God knew that was going to happen. You know, he knew we were going to have stress from everywhere. So he's talking about this stress physiology, this what we talked about today, the amygdala, the inflammation, damage to the endothelium, all you that have, and I will give you a gift that comes from God. I will give you rest. And we're just now having the science to prove that God's word is ahead of scientific technology.
Wow. This is so mind-blowing. So God anticipated our stress.
Yes. He knew this was going to happen.
Wow.
He gave us the remedy for this problem that was going to happen in the universe.
Wow. I'd say quickly, we're going to need to close, but you know, we're both in our fourth decade now of taking care of patients. So we've seen thousands and thousands of patients. When I think of stress and I ask patients, what do you think the source of the stress is? It usually comes out money, family strife, troubles with relationships, and then addiction and drugs.
Right.
I would say those three are way up there. And do you know, for all of those, we don't have a pill.
No.
We don't have a surgery that can have that.
No. But we have a way to change our physiology. It's because we're disconnected from our Creator. So we need to get back in connection with our Creator to mitigate some of this damage that's occurred. And when I think of all this stress damage, I don't think about what's happening. Why is it happening? Why is a person doing this? Are they taking drugs? They're hurting inside. They're looking for something more.
Yes.
And even the people that deny truth, they're looking for something that they don't really know that they have. And the real solution to that is our owner's manual.
That's it.
The only piece we have is to come into me.
The guidebook.
Right. So if we don't get back to that, we're going to continue to. And I think that's what Charlie Kirk was talking about.
Yes.
He sort of found that remarkable discovery. So I want to apply that to modern medicine.
There you go.
Now, there's a place for stents. There's a place for bypass. Does that really fix the problem forever? No. Right. It's a Band-Aid. We're all going to wear out at some point. But when I wear out here on Earth, I want something guaranteed in my future.
There we go. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Yeah. This has been a terrific conversation. If you don't know Dr. James Marcum, look him up. He's got a wonderful program on YouTube. And the title of your program
Biblical Prescriptions for Life.
Biblical Prescriptions for Life. Boy, don't we need those, everybody. So check him out, James Marcum, Biblical Prescriptions for Life on YouTube. It's probably one of the most popular, watched YouTube video series. It's well worth it. This has been an astounding hour that we spent together. I think you've made the compelling case that the Bible and the teachings in the Bibles, anticipated our later on science and scientific discovery and advancements. And probably it's true whatever we come up with in the future, we'll probably be able to come back and say, there it is.
And if it's not coming back in the line to the Bible, maybe we should question it.
Wow. Okay, terrific. Thank you so much for being on the program.
My pleasure, Dr. McCullough.